been able to come, I guess. And I love to see all the people here. Had fun playing games Friday night. Don't play with Al, he's very dangerous. He won. So we're happy to be here and working with you. Just talking with the lady who is on the team with window washers. I guess we'll be seeing a lot of them, and I understand some of the gentlemen will be painting. Joshi, if you put that on Facebook, I'm going to get you. I'll let Toshi take your picture, okay? Anyway, I guess some of the men will be starting the painting soon of the building. Next week. So we'll be meshing with you in a lot of different ways. Some great people have come across working with Sharon, some digitization for us, and database stuff, yeah. I see my lady there. And so anyway, we're thrilled to work with you guys. But we wanted you to hear a little bit of what we're doing. And we've asked Ed Young. Ed and Judy are Arizonans for a long time, but they're famous for touring around Mexico with their 7 children in a couple of the rigs that you'll see on the back of our building, back of our property right still. And they've come up for the winter to spend time with us. And Ed has a real heart for immigrant work, work along the border and the different groups around here. So Ed, why don't you come up and just share a little bit, and we'll be seeing the rest of you throughout the winter. And that's great.
Well, I'd really like to start out by saying how pleased I am to be here, my wife and I. And I don't know how much you know how much of an inspiration you were to us. My wife and I were kind of the first ones to show up here from the GRN team. And I just felt we felt so warmly welcomed by the volunteers, because in a sense we were in the same bucket. We were here temporarily and just looking around. But you welcomed us. We came to your morning meetings over here, and we went down to the breaks all the time, and we met people, and you were people with vision and capabilities and ministry and a desire to serve God at a stage in your life that's similar to ours. And we have just felt privileged to be with you. For those who don't remember us, we're the ones that had that old truck. It's down here. Modified just a little bit, but I'd like to explain a little bit, we keep working on it, how we do our work, because it is very similar to SIL, but also very different. We've always been in audio. SIL has basically been in written form, but of late they've started doing a lot in audio, and I think you're probably aware of it. There's a section of SIL, or what do they call it, international something, that's actually doing audio translation. Are you aware of that? Mm-hmm. They're going from oral to oral without doing written form. Wow. And I think they picked some of that up from us, because we've worked with SIL a lot in a lot of places, and we, like was mentioned, we worked in Mexico. So we used to stop here on our way into Mexico. We know some of the translators, and I've always had a great admiration for people who would go into an area and spend the time that it takes to do a translation project. GRN doesn't do that same thing. We are doing, there's a term that's called storying these days, but it's not the storying that we do. We take a text, an information, and we kind of tell the story of that without trying to remain faithful to the exact words of the text. Bible translators have to be focused on the words of the text and do an equivalent of that. Exactly. Don't skip verses, but do everything. What we would do was get the general gist of the story, but then we would want to have an explanation and an application, so that people would hear a message and then be faced with how does this apply to their lives. Now, we have always trained our recordist, and my wife and I are recordists, and John was a recordist, in translation principles, but we were not translators. our purpose was to go into an area with already stories that were suitable for that area, Bible stories that were suitable contextually, culturally, would be understood and have impact in their lives. So over the years, we've developed quite a few scripts with the help of nationals, national Christians, missionaries in the area, but we would develop material, not just take a message that somebody spoke in a church somewhere and translate that, because they don't always go. So we want the story of the prodigal son, the lost sheep, Noah, creation, the story of Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection, all those stories, but they would be story form. And we, I don't know if I can say relied totally, but pretty much so, on the capabilities of our language helpers. We are not trained linguists, but we have the skills to watch for problem terminology, make sure we're doing a storyline that will flow within their network. And what needs to be understood, and I think many of you would already know this, a cultural bilingual has been a bilingual pretty much all his life. He's always been capable of thinking in 2, 3, several languages, and taking information from this language and putting it in that language and making it clear. And so we guarded the translation, but we did not do the translation. And then we would always have to, what we would do is orally tell the person, we would not read it to them, we would orally tell the person a short segment. Well, first we would read the whole text, the whole thing, but then we'd go back and do a short segment at a time. They know where they're going to because they heard the whole thing, and then we'd give them short segments. Sometimes it would be just 1 or 2 sentences, sometimes maybe even shorter than that. But then we would stop the machinery. We could do that, and then give them the next segment, record that, stop, give them the next segment, and walk through that. And then when we're done, we play the whole thing to see that it fits together well. And in audio, just as in the same as in written form, you have a draft when you're done. In our case, because we didn't have to be as precise as translators, the drafts were intended to be personalized, so it came across the way this person would tell it. If somebody else was doing it, it might sound just a little bit different, but the main thing is when you're telling a story, you tell the story. If 2 of you were going to tell the story of something, you might tell it a little different, but it would contain the main factors that need to be there present. So we had the responsibility of doing that. I have to say I was very surprised when I heard Bible translators were starting to do this. I heard this, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even more than that, because I went to India after that, and I visited some people that were doing that, and I was amazed at how careful they could be, because what they did is they would do the recording, they do all the preparation, get it in a written, they don't always do it in written form. In fact, in this case, they're not doing it written form. They walk through it orally, and then they have a draft, and they play that, and they have other people who are knowledgeable checking that, and there's always, for them, there always needs to be adaptions and getting it right. They can go through it, record that segment, change it, then they have a second draft. And then they actually have a consultant who would go through that. And so you can do the same thing with oral that you can do with written when it comes to drafts. And like I say, I was surprised that they were doing that, because we have had confidence in this method right from the beginning. But again, we're not trying to guard the text of Scripture in the way that they do. We want information from Scripture that adequately gives a clear understanding of creation, how this world came into being, how people came into being, how sin came into being, and then the remedy for that. Because when we're done, we want to give people something that will give them an adequate amount of information that helps them to understand their need for a relationship with God and how they can come into the family of God. Our desire is that they're going on from there. Our desire is that the material that we make get into the hands of evangelists, national evangelists, missionaries, people who want to go out and share the gospel in such a way that others come into the family of God. I'll just throw in a couple of thoughts about, if you have any questions about this, you can ask me later or something. We're going to be around, hopefully, for the winter. Yeah. This is our first winter as real snowbirds. And I had a great blessing the other day. It doesn't sound like it to start with. Sunday morning I woke up and my pipes were frozen in my house. We live in Flagstaff. And I was a little depressed about that. You guys know all of the answers to these things, so I want to be visiting with you folks. I hope I can come down to your breaks.
Anytime.
Thank you. Because you're going to help me to know how to cope with these things. All I could